Hello, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming, and today we're going to talk about Blades for Hire. First of all, clearly I'm feeling quite a bit better. You're getting most of my voice now. I'm at about maybe 80 to 90%. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about what a Blade for Hire is. We're going to go over the Beastmaster, Drazhar and Incubi, Mandrakes and Scourges, not necessarily in that order. A Blade for Hire, if you think back to 9th edition, it was units that were not in the Drukhari army, but were in the Drukhari army. So you could take them, but they didn't really get like any of your army bonuses. So they didn't get any of the Cabalite rules or the Witch rules or anything like that. The main thing that we see now is that they get all of your army bonuses. There's no restrictions on them, which is something we're seeing throughout the whole game right now. Whether or not that lasts beyond the index, I don't know. But historically, these units have been all over the place in terms of whether or not they've been good or bad or in between. And we're going to look at all of them right now and see where they kind of fit in 10th. Beastmaster, I think this is a really interesting unit. I don't like that I have to be shoehorned into taking every beast, especially considering there's no box or models for them. So you're going to have to kit bash them with Sigmar models or other analogs. And that's really what makes the biggest issue the most apparent. And that's that you have to take each beast, right? You have 3 Razorwing Flocks, but they don't make Razorwing Flocks. You have to take 2 Chimera, but they don't make Chimera. You have to take a Clawed Fiend, but they don't make Clawed Fiend. You have to take a Beastmaster, but they don't make the Beastmaster. So overall, it's just kind of weird that we have to take the unit like this when there's no box or kit. I don't know if that means there will be a box or kit coming out for them. I have to imagine one is coming soon, but obviously we don't know. Before we dig into the data sheet, let's look at what the Beastmaster unit is and what you could use to make them. If you want a Beastmaster, he's just a boy on the Hellion hoverboard. You could make one very easily with a Hellion. And a Clawed Fiend could be a Yeti or Crypt Horror or even like a Rock or Cave Troll. Like any of those models would be okay. I think the Crypt Horrors are probably going to be the closest in size. Maybe the Yetis. The Chimera, you could do Dire Wolves and then just put some Gene Stealer Scything Talons on them. Or even like there's some dogs in the Corn Demon. I forget what they're called. Those would work also. And then the Razorwing Flocks, the Aetherwings would work. They're in a Stormcast Eternals box. I don't remember which one, but they are there. And obviously, there's always third-party options, but as a GW employee, I'm always going to recommend GW models first. And that's not because of anything other than I really just don't want somebody that I work for to be like, hey, don't do that, right? It's just to avoid any kind of conflict of interest or issue with Games Workshop when I make videos that are about their games. That's all it's for. Now let's take a look at the data sheet. It's pretty straightforward. Everything in the unit has a 12-inch move. It's all T4, and it's all right in front of us, right? Like there's nothing crazy or major here, and most of it is pretty standard and the same. We're not going to go over each individual weapon or profile because for the most part, they're not the best. You know, the Clawed Fiends are okay in terms of melee. The shooting is not great, but that's not where these are really actually pretty good. If you look, everything in here has a 6-up invuln, and it all has the beast keyword. If you look at the keywords, one of the first things it says is all models get beast. That means your Beastmaster gets beast. And what that means is that they can interact with terrain like infantry, right? Like ruins, infantry, and beasts can move through them. And that's where they get their utility. I don't think they're a terrible take. I think, like I said, they've got some utility. With everything getting the beast keyword, you can move through ruins. 12-inch movement is pretty mobile, especially with being able to interact with terrain the way they can. Having an assault weapon, because the sergeant has an assault weapon, the Beastmaster, he's actually a character, but the Beastmaster having an assault weapon means you get to advance and are still eligible to shoot, which means it opens the door to a lot of utility for interacting with different secondaries also. They get a 9-inch scout move, which is also really good. So 120 points does get you 21 wounds because you get 3 Razorwing Flocks and they're 3 wounds each. 21 total wounds with a 6-up invuln, a 9-inch scout move, and 12 inches of movement with the infantry beast keyword. Now, they won't necessarily kill a lot, but that's a lot of wounds for the points, and they're pretty mobile. And to put it into perspective, Gretchen are 11 wounds for 45 points. So for 90 points of Gretchen, 90 points of Gretchen, you get 22 wounds. You don't have an invuln. You actually don't even have an armor save. You don't get a scout move without the character. And I know they're not the same as Gretchen. It's just to give you a good analog, like a good way to see that these actually have a lot more value than I initially thought. When I first looked at them, I was like, I'll never take this unit. But now that I've dug into them a little bit, I can see quite a bit of value in that unit because even though they have 21 wounds, they have a relatively small footprint because it's not a lot of models. It's 3 Razor Wings, 2 Chimera, 1 Claw Fiend, 1 Beastmaster. So you're looking at 7 models. They will have to be within 2 inches of 2 other models. But, like I said, it's a small footprint. It's a lot of mobility. They can advance. If you need to, you can 2 CP to double move them, the strike and fade. So overall, I could see these being in lists just as a run up the table objective grabber, the 9-inch scout movement, being able to score you engage very quickly, etc. So Mandrakes, in the context of 10th edition, they're solid. If you look at what they were in 9th, they are less effective at killing, both in shooting and in ranged, because they lost AP on both. But they're still not bad. Infiltrator and Stealth. Infiltrator will allow them to forward deploy, which allows you to bubble screen against your opponent's infiltrates, and it allows you to bubble screen against scout moves, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then the Fade Away ability is awesome, and Stealth will help keep them on the table just a little bit longer against shooting attacks. Being -1 to hit is relevant. So the Mandrakes Datasheet, they move 8 inches. They're T3, obviously, and 7-up save, but they do have a 5-up invuln. And then Stealth. They get 2 shots with Assault and Devastating Wounds, so they can advance and are eligible to shoot, which is very important. And then their Glimmer Steel Blade is just Strength 50 AP. So again, it's not great. It's not bad. Like, it's very just average. Very meh. But like I said, the Fade Away ability is really what helps them. So let's look at their utility now. I think taking multiple MSU, which is just minimum size units or whatever you want it to mean, but just so you understand, like maybe 2 5-mans, 3 5-mans is probably a bit excessive, but at least 2 5-mans allows for redundancies in scoring, and it opens up a lot of value for your tactical objectives as well as fixed. 2x5 infiltrate can screen opponents from using infiltrate. It can keep people from running down your throat with scout movements. And Date Away, because it's supposed to say Fade Away, and I have fat fingers. It does let you teleport in your opponent's turn and then come back in your own movement phase, which is great for deploying homers behind enemy lines or cleanse, and really any objective that requires movement and positioning. Being able to advance and cleanse or advance and homers is good. Being able to teleport and do those things is very good. And 70 points is actually really cheap for just a roadblock unit with a lot of utility and scoring potential. So I think I personally don't run them right now, but that's just because I'm in a league and I'm kind of locked into my list. I can only change it if I lose. I lost round 1 against GSC. I didn't feel like that was a good test for how good my list was. Won round 2 against Marines. And this matchup I've got against Custodes coming up is going to be the deciding factor on if I switch things around. Scourges, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about these. We've talked about them pretty much ad nauseum. They're awesome. They're arguably one of the best units in our index right now. You have different loadout options that make them a very flexible and viable unit, with options that will keep them viable as the meta shifts and changes. Right now, my preference is the Heat Lance. I do know a lot of you that watch and listen love Dark Lances, and that's not wrong. They are very good as well. It just comes down to your preference and what you play against a lot in your local groups. I tend to run into demons and monsters a lot that have high toughness like Nids, and I just prefer having the strength 14 over the strength 12. I trade off some damage to wound on 3s. Again, it's a personal preference. There's nothing wrong with either. It's whatever you like and whatever is working for you. If you're running Dark Lances and it's working, don't change because I said Heat Lances are good. If you're running Heat Lances and somebody says Dark Lances are good, don't change if your Heat Lances are working for you. Again, I'm just going to reiterate, I, as a person, will never that what you're doing is wrong and that you should play a specific way. I am going to try to help you figure out how to use the units you like so that you can play with the models and units you like and not get rolled every game. That's my goal. Splinter cannons and shredders have a lot of play depending on your local groups. So again, that's what makes Scourges so good is they have a gun for any situation. And as you and your play groups kind of shift with different metas and as things change, you will always have an option. They're a really versatile and mobile unit, and it's probably in every Drukhari list right now. There's the list of guns. It takes up most of the data sheet. Again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time here. Winged Strike is just a 6-inch fire and fade in your shooting phase. Their value is awesome. They have a 14-inch move. They fly. They're infantry. They have a 6-inch baked-in fire and fade. They can inherently deep strike, which means you can come down, empower them in the shooting phase, shoot, and then move them 6 inches in the shooting phase. Because remember, you are eligible to move even if you came from deep strike, as long as it's not in the movement phase. So that fire and fade does work on the turn you came out of deep strike. If you give them assault weapons, they can advance shoot. You can strap fire and fade and data sheet fire and fade if you need them to, which means they can move a minimum of 34 inches in a single turn if you stack everything up. And they're not super expensive, so let's enjoy them while we can, guys. That's all I'm going to say about Scourges. Like I said, auto take. Now, our last Blade for Hire we're going to talk about today is going to be Incubi and Drazhar. In the context of 10th edition, their melee is solid, right? It's not amazing, it's just good. If you are hung up on looking on at what they could do in 9th, Incubi are just not good. But if you flush your concept of good melee out of your head from 9th and look at it with the context of 10th, they're good. They're not great, they're good. But if you bring Drazhar, they are excellent at killing Marines. They're excellent at killing Terminators. They're excellent at really killing anything T7 or weaker, which I know is not a ton of stuff right now competitively because a lot of the competitive lists are just how can I bring as much T10, T11, T12 as I can. But people still bring infantry. And Incubi and Drazhar will kill infantry. They will chip wounds on those high toughness vehicles, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I personally don't think 5-man squads of Incubi are worth. You either go whole hog and you take everything, or you just spend your points on something else. That's my take on it. You may have better success with 5-man units. I personally don't like 5-man units for my Incubi. I do take Drazhar and Incubi in pretty much every game that I play. They were in my league list. I took them to a tournament, etc. I've had good success with them, but I've tempered those expectations, and I understand that right now, except for Scourges and a couple of other units, most of our units are a specific tool for a specific job. Drazhar gives the whole unit +1 to wound, which makes them pretty dangerous, especially into power armor, right? So here's the data sheet. I'm not going to cover Drazhar's data sheet. Again, we've talked about Drazhar a lot. We've talked about Incubi, not as much as Drazhar, but we've talked about Incubi a little bit. So the Clave and the Demi-Claves are really just different profiles. Like the Clave is your base boy. The Demi-Claves go on the Sergeant. And then the Demi-Claves give you either the Clave profile or a sweep profile that rerolls its wounds. Most of the time, I just use the Clave profile, and it's mostly because I forget that I can sweep with them, and I'm lazy, right? I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm just like, 30 dice, let's roll them, let's go. Because they do get 3 attacks each. And then at the start of the fight phase, you can force battle shock tests. Again, I remember it. We use it. Most of the time, it's not an issue. My opponent doesn't really fail them very often because of the way Battle Shock interacts right now. They do have a 3-up save, so they have one of the best saves in our index, and a 5-up invuln, so not bad. So the value in Incubi and Drazhar. So I'm going to start off the bat and tell you all it's an expensive unit, and I put them in a Raider. So that means it's about 355 points for Drazhar, the Incubi, and the boat. If you don't feel like they are worth their points, then don't bring them. I'm not going to argue with people and tell you you need to have Incubi. I know that Incubi are not point efficient. I don't play them because I think they're busted. I play them because I love the models and I refuse to stop interacting in the fight phase. I play Drukhari and I play Orcs because I like the fight phase. I'm not going to eschew my melee units simply because melee's in a bad spot right now. If it's not for you, that's fine. I'm just telling you how I get value out of them. I've never been sad that I've brought them. I've never had a game where I've put them on the table and they didn't interact. And I've never had a game where I thought, man, I wish I had something instead of those Incubi and Drazhar. 10 Incubi is 30 attacks at strength 4, neg 2 damage, like we just said. And obviously, you can empower them so they can reroll their hits. And if you get them into the right targets, they will evaporate those targets. Higher toughness targets, like I said, you really want to kind of avoid. If it's T8 or higher, I would probably not charge it unless it's something that's very shooty, right? Like a Lehman Russ, I might charge with them just to give you that -1 to your hit rolls. That being said, the math on it isn't crazy, right? If you're getting 30 attacks with the Incubi, with re-rolling hits, you're going to get 26, 27 hits. Let's call it 26 for easy math. You're going to get a third of those through, which means you're going to get 8 to 9 through, and they're going to make half of those. So let's call it 8 again for easy math. They're going to fail 4 saves. You're only doing 8 damage. However, you still have Drazhar to fight. Drazhar will wound it on 4s because you're going to use his strength 6. So it's one of those where it's still not bad to send them into high toughness things. I just wouldn't send them into like a Brutalis or something that's going to melee me back, and then I'm going to lose half my squad on the clapback, even though I did maybe like 8 to 10 damage on the swing forward. Like, I don't want to trade that way. I don't want to be like, ha, I crippled you, but your crippled unit is still going to cripple my unit on the clapback. I'd much rather smack them into a tank that has 0 AP attacks, and then I lose maybe 1 or 2 to bad dice, and then lose them in your shooting phase, and just know that you're stuck with me unless you fall back. T7 or weaker, you're probably killing it. T8 or higher, you're going to struggle. And that's okay as long as you understand that and temper your expectations. So I typically hold them back until turn 3 or 4. And that's really because I don't need them interacting the whole game. A common misconception is that if your unit isn't doing something, it's not worth bringing. But if my unit is dictating the flow of the game, it's actually interacting with the game without interacting with the game. So if my opponent knows, and trust me, all of my opponents that I play with here, they know what Drazhar does, they know what the Incubi do, and they will avoid them, or they will go out of their way to try to kill them, one or the other. And either way is a win for me because I'm dictating the flow of the game simply by having them on the table. And I will do a much more in-depth video on that next week. We'll talk about how I use Incubi, how I use Drazhar, how I use Lilith and Witches, and how I can use them to dictate the flow of the game and to get people to make mistakes and put things where I want them rather than putting them where they want them. Like I said, 350 plus points is a lot. Damn it, I want them on the table. But I understand that not a lot of players out there will be willing to commit that many points to something that they feel like isn't interacting with the game the whole game. You know, it's one of those where, again, you just have to temper your expectations, understand how to use them. I can tell you right now, when I play Custodes this weekend, Drazhar and the Incubi are going to be invaluable because I know how to play Custodes now. I've played against them a couple times. I have a much stronger understanding for what they do, and I know how to bait and get people into those traps. And I did a whole video on playing against Custodes and what I am probably going to do. I'll put a card up so you guys can see it, and I'll try to put it in the description. It was a live one, so it's a little bit longer, but I talk about what my overall game plan is going to be, and I talk about what we can do to play against them. I already know what units I want to send my Incubi into. I've already got that kind of worked out in my brain. In conclusion, most of the Blades for Hire are actually pretty good right now. Most of them aren't insanely killy outside of Scourges, but a lot of them bring good utility. Mandrakes and Scourges, to me, top the list. Mandrakes for their utility, Scourges because there's literally nothing they can't do, right? They shoot well, they move really well, they move multiple times. You can clear over half the board in a single turn if you need to. So to me, Mandrakes for the utility, Scourges for their versatility and utility. And I think Incubi are just at the bottom right now, and that's just because they're probably a little bit expensive in terms of points. Overall, I think the Incubi melee is pretty good. Again, if you look at it in the context of 10th, Incubi are very good in melee. But I understand why most players don't think they're solid right now. And really, they do need a points drop. But I believe that really you can make any of them work. If you understand what you're doing and you start assigning specific jobs or roles to any of your units, you can make any unit in the Codex work. We can do it. So if you have questions on any of the units in the index, and you're like, hey, Chris, I can't figure out what I can do with these. Like, hey, bro, I've got like 30 witches and I want to put them on the table, but they're just not worth it. I'm going to agree with you, but if you want to play them, I will sit down and we will figure out how to get them on the table and make them feel better. So, thank you for listening. As always, big shout out to my Immortals, Captain Too Tall, the real Donnie G, Lord Wellingstone, and Daniel Bodecker. You guys are awesome. You guys are amazing, and I appreciate your support as always. And links on the screen, links in the description. And don't forget, there's a giveaway for when we hit 500 subscribers, and we're almost there. Thanks, guys.